So thanks, Ben.
This meeting is being recorded.
Okay. All right, Professor.
Yeah.
In Centennial, Colorado.
How about that? Yeah, look at here.
You know, so some people plan like months in ahead, and some people plan years in ahead. And the professor told me like 2 days ago, hey, I'm gonna be at your home Friday morning. Okay.
Yeah.
And anyway, I'm really glad you.
Well, I said it was a possibility.
Well, I know, but yeah. So I couldn't even schedule this.
Yeah, you said, and then you said, well, what percentage-wise? And I said, well, if you want to do
Probably.
it, if you want to do the show,
I do want to do the
then,
show.
Then I have to do it from your house because I'm on the road.
Right, and
So,
he drove his motorcycle over here from California, and it was how many? 1,700 miles
so far, yeah.
God, that is crazy. You're going to be back in California Sunday night.
Yep, that's the plan.
Yeah, so I want to see what his body looks like after this, like across the whole United States in like 4 or 5 days.
Yeah, it's pretty beat up, but I'm feeling all right.
Okay, well, I'm really glad you're here in my backyard. I don't know what we look like, but hey, do we have the piano in the back? Can you tell?
Yeah. I kind of.
Who else has a piano in their backyard? Sorry not to plant it all. It's still winter in Colorado, but we're coming around. So, Professor, here's today's conversation. It's kind of fun to just be able to look at you.
I know.
Being on a computer. Yeah. So thanks for being here. I'm gonna be surprised if I totally stump you, but I'm gonna stump you a couple times, I think. Here's the big picture. It's 2023. We have all the world's technology right in front of us in our backyard. We're on our phone, and we should just have an authoritative answer on this. You should have the authoritative answer. What are the top 5 issues facing Americans today? And I want to go deep on this, not just like, abortion, capital punishment, that kind of stuff. I want to kind of go deep. And the reason I want to go deep is because a fellow professor of yours, Professor Bloodworth, I thought it was a really intriguing article. It was way deeper than I would have imagined. I read it twice, and I still want to read it a third time because on a superficial read, I was sad. It was just a plain sad story. And I'm not positive it's a sad story. I think it's a really intriguing story. So I want to go in that. I want to talk about your friend Jeff Bloodworthy, Professor Bloodworthy, or a little bit about that story. Is that one of the top 5 issues?
I
loneliness?
think so. Yes.
Yeah, okay. I'm sorry to give you one cheater already, but
well,
go ahead.
Would put it a different way.
Yeah.
So you just want my top 5 issues facing Americans.
Yeah, today in 2023.
I think that I would put it differently. I'd say that the loneliness is a symptom, not the disease. I think the disease is probably the lack of a civic culture, lack of institutions and culture that binds people together.
And then he took a major aspect of that,
it's one of the consequences of it is that people feel lonely and depressed and unconnected to others.
Let's go back to that. I think I've got it. Lack of civic culture is one of the top 5 issues facing Americans. Is it Americans worldwide?
I think it's probably going to be worldwide in developed countries.
Okay. All right. Let's keep it that. What's number 2?
Probably. Well, I guess some of these have to do with. A lot of these things feed off of this one problem we have with American culture, but so I'm trying to think of other things that are not that, because so many things fall under that umbrella. I think worldwide is probably also a lack of appreciation of pluralism, with the result that people are questioning the institutions that help keep us safe and prosperous and free.
Okay, now remember, you're a professor and I'm not, and that's why this is sometimes a fun conversation. Pluralism really doesn't.
Fun?
Yeah. Well, pluralism doesn't mean much to me. That seems like some fancy big word.
Understanding that you need to protect the unpopular rights of unpopular minorities in order to have the kinds of institutions that that make it possible to live peaceful lives. And
that's what pluralism means?
Well, pluralism just means many. So
Okay. Well, that makes sense.
right. Plural means many,
Okay.
but it's an understanding that there is no one single thing that all of your life needs to revolve around, that you need to protect many rights.
Are you sure you're a conservative? That sounds like a liberal concept.
Not if you're an American. If you're an American, pluralism is a conservative concept.
Okay.
Because we're a country founded in pluralism.
Okay.
So that's why I always define myself as an American conservative.
Okay.
Because I always say I'm here to defend or conserve the pluralistic American past.
Oh, I don't think we ever talked about it quite in that way. Okay. All right. So that's number 2. You've
But
got
that's
3
why
more.
I'm not a European conservative. That's why I'm not on the right. for
Right.
instance.
Which is something you've
Yeah.
always had some umbrage
Yeah,
over the
yeah.
left and the right. Yeah. Okay.
Right.
Cool. So that's 2. We got 2 out of
So
your
I
5.
think that some of it is a cultural problem of Americans. So this would be number 1, that we're not protecting the culture that protects American pluralism at home. And
But would a conservative in the 50s, 60s, and 70s have said that same thing? When we're talking anti-Vietnam protests and the civil rights engagement, conservatives wouldn't say that my job is to protect the rights of an unpopular position and an unpopular minority. No one would define themselves like that.
I
A
think
conservative, American conservative, no one would say that.
sure they would have.
Really?
Yeah, Dwight Eisenhower
Dwight Eisenhower
gave
did,
a
but
speech, said don't join the book burners.
I got that.
Right.
Okay, Eisenhower did, but Reagan sure didn't, and he's one of my heroes.
Yeah,
and
no, of course he did.
he did?
Yes, Reagan gave speech after speech defending American pluralism under the founding and
Really?
protection of rights.
How about Goldwater? Goldwater didn't do that.
Goldwater even more so.
Oh my gosh, I've got to learn so much.
Goldwater
Really?
was much more sort of libertarian leaning than.
Well,
those
that's
other
kind of like
guys.
why I like Goldwater. But would our liberal friends,
Yeah, they would have.
would they agree with this?
Yes,
Or they'd agree with this.
Yeah, this would be something that Lyndon Johnson and Wood and Richard
When my
Nixon would have
real
agreed on.
Democratic liberal friends, if I could convince them to watch this podcast or listen to it on Spotify, they'd go, "Oh yeah, I get these two. This is our team."
Yeah, with the
Liberals.
caveat of like, if you say real liberals, yeah,
Real
Right,
liberals.
right.
Okay.
I mean, but I guess one of the things that indicates maybe a cultural problem is you take something like the ACLU,
Right.
which used to be.
I used to agree with them 60% of the time. Agree
Right,
with them 60% of the
But
time.
now they have abandoned their original mission.
Now, so I only agree with them 30% of the time now.
Well, they don't. But another group has come around called FIRE.
Never
that
heard
now
of them.
Foundation for, it used to be the Foundation for Individual Rights and Education,
Okay.
but now it's the Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression. But now they kind of do what the ACLU used to do.
Interesting.
And I think it's also interesting.
So I'd agree with them 60% of the time now.
Well, I mean, I agree with FIRE 100% of the time.
Well, that's because you're more conservative than I am.
Yeah, well, I certainly believe in the Bill of Rights and stuff like that.
Okay, well,
Yeah,
now, all right,
yeah,
you're trying to trump me. All right.
Yeah,
So no, that's 2.
yeah,
An
so
appreciation of pluralism.
yeah, but I would say worldwide.
Yeah, I got that as
sort
a
of
worldwide issue.
understanding, Yeah.
Yeah, cool. What are the other top 3 issues facing Americans today?
I think that we have an unnecessary division, but this would almost be a consequence of the unnecessary division in other areas. But we have an unnecessary division when it comes to an understanding of how to protect natural resources.
Ah, fascinating.
You know, this
natural resource.
in other words, how do we people tend to think of environmentalists as being on the opposite side of people who care about quality of life issues, and I think that's a destructive division.
For the cause and for
Well, I think we end up
just
hurting.
people.
I mean, we always see the extreme example of this in California, but we end up doing things that hurt the environment because of this division over what would help the environment. You know, we're not managing our water resources, or we don't have nuclear power. You know, I mean, climate
or shipping coal by ship to a place that has less environmental controls rather than more.
Right, or how we are transitioning away from gas-powered vehicles, that sort of thing. We could just be moving much. I think we could be moving much more effectively and protecting the environment more if we didn't have these very bizarre political positions that are taken up.
Okay, that's a good one. That surprises me. Good. So I've got environmental unnecessary division and natural resources and environmental law and policy and cool.
And then I think there always remains.
This is number 4.
Yeah.
Okay.
Number 4 is always the threat of. I guess in some ways this is kind of the other side of the coin, which is there's always the threat of monism. Well, I'm just using that term because
Mona single.
Yeah, right.
Okay.
So I mean, if I say that we don't appreciate pluralism, is it a separate thing to say that there's always this appeal that we're going to face from peoples and cultures who say that pluralism doesn't work and it's a waste of time, and that what we really need are these it doesn't really matter what the alternative is. It could be racism, it could be nationalism, it could be
some kind of a totalitarian, authoritarian.
Right. Well, the word totalitarian is another way of saying monism.
Monism, okay.
Right. So you have a thing that is a single organizing principle. Tony's trying to get your attention.
You need to let me in.
Oh.
Sorry.
Excuse me. We pause this for our commercial break. This is for people that want to advertise with us.
Yeah.
This is when you can in for Tony Acme Enterprises.
Yeah.
The worldwide conglomerate of.
I got booted over here, so I had to log on.
Thanks, producer.
Yeah.
Okay.
So sorry. So I think that it's another way of saying, like, we have to be constantly mindful of foreign threats. You know.
Well, foreign or internal threats.
Yeah, but if I'm thinking specifically, you know, the kind of threat that we face from China,
right?
Or it could be any other country that is large, that, you know, doesn't.
And why are you singling out China versus Russia?
Because China's so much bigger and stronger and more powerful and bigger population, bigger economy. You know, Russia's a fraction of China in terms of.
True, but aren't they a
threat?
Aren't they? But you were still singling out your, what it is, a monism on China, and not including the biggest threat to Europe.
I would include, yeah, but if I'm saying what's a bigger threat, the bigger threat is the country that's bigger and stronger and wealthier and has better technology and.
They're both a threat, though.
I think so.
Okay,
yeah.
all right. So that's number 4. Threats of monism, which I've never heard that word before.
Well, I would, maybe that's to just say foreign threats of a totalitarian nature. You know.
Okay, cool. Well, that's helpful for my next question. And 5, you have a 5?
We've already said foreign threats. We've already said environment, and then culture. This is almost a subset of the first one, but I worry about in America the incentives that have been built into our elite institutions that are kind of perpetuating a permanent elite class. Kind of worried about that over the long term.
Interesting. Okay, let me add one, and then you can add another one or two. I'm concerned that we are not worldly. We seem to want cheap TV sets. I've got a couple in my house, and cheap, I don't know, utensils and cheap garden tools, and it's cheap everything. And not wondering whether there's some cost to that cheapness, some long-term consequence to it. And that gets into a couple of years. But I also mean by, I don't know what elected official effectively is saying we can't afford this, and we're going to have to really reinvent government or rethink of this. We can't have everything for nothing. Someone's going to pay the bill, and it's our kids and grandkids. I mean, the fix the debt folks were doing that for a long time, but maybe the pandemic or something, they kind of gave up on that and nuanced it a little bit. And I still like them. I'm not even criticizing them, but it seems like it's a cultural thing that we want. There's a rock song about her. Money
for nothing and your chicks.
Yeah. I mean, it seems like we've all gone that way.
Right.
There's something wrong culturally?
Yes. Yeah.
Is there a way to describe that? Is that a theory? Is that a number 6, or is that incorporated?
I think it has to do with, 1 and 5.
Okay.
I think part of it is that people have not taken enough control over their own place in society. And then the flip side of that is that incentive structures have built up to continue those bad habits. So
I don't know how we unwind that. Is there another? Is that worthy of a 6?
No, I think it's
1 and 5.
It's really 1 and 5.
All right. Unsustained debt, though, personal and.
But think about how we talk about these kinds of issues. You say, oh, we should have free college for everybody.
Right.
And we sort of accept that language as, oh, this is going to be free college for everybody. But there's no such thing as free college,
sure,
because college costs money.
Yeah.
And it's so somebody is paying for you to be in college. What you're saying essentially is, I want someone else to pay for me to go to college.
Well, but college used to be free in California, if you're a Californian.
Yes.
Right. So, but now it's not, and now they want to go back, which is conservative.
I would think that, but the problem is they're not really going back, because the way that it used to be is that it was essentially free, but you had to get in, and you had standards that you had to meet at every stage. Because now it's free college without any accountability. It's credentialism now, which is, we kind of, I sometimes say this is a problem of the seduction of social science, confusing the cause with the effect. We think that we see something that correlates. If you are if you have a 4-year degree, you're more likely to earn a higher salary.
Right.
And we somehow think that if we just give you a 4-year degree, then you will just automatically have the higher salary.
There's got to be underlying
right.
To the,
it's confusing correlation with causation.
Okay.
And we see this sort of hyper example of that throughout California policy, where now it's virtually destroyed schools, elementary schools, junior highs, and high schools, and now it's on its way to destroying higher education.
Fascinating.
And the trend is spreading throughout the country.
All right, we'll talk more about that in future shows. But I want to make sure if I get to this next question. I've only asked one question so far.
Sorry.
So second question. The top 5 issues facing America today, and you threw in some worldwide stuff, is the lack of civic culture, appreciation of pluralism, unnecessary division, specifically regarding natural resources, threat of monism, and then the incentives of the elite keeping a power structure differential. Those are layman's terms, understanding your top 5. I tried to throw in another one. You didn't accept.
Well, just say like totalitarian threats from abroad, if that makes that maybe is an easier way.
So now going back 1500, 150 to 250, doesn't matter. Pick any of those eras. What are the top 5 threats that have historically faced America? And there may be nuances between those 50-year increments, but historically and culturally, where do those 5 current issues fit in to what we faced 50 or 100, 150 years ago?
Well, we always face the problem of the perpetuation of our institutions. And it's something the founders understood in every generation, every previous generation, until the last.
Which one? What number is that? That's the universal. That stayed the same. Is that 1 or 5?
What was let's go through my 5 again.
Lack of civic culture in institutions.
Yeah. So
that's been a
kind of it's number 1 in some version of it has always been the problem.
Okay, give another topic historically that have faced our great grandparents and beyond.
In essence, everything on that list is something that is a challenge that we've had to face.
So what's something different then that that we've solved, that's no longer an issue in America because either the founders solved it or the Civil War solved it or the
It's funny. I would say that I was reading something on my motorcycle ride, and it prompted me to.
Wait, what do you mean you were reading something?
Well, I got into my
listening to something. On your
yeah, I was
motorcycle.
listening to something on
Okay.
my phone, and then when I got back to the hotel for the night, it prompted me to go back and look at the concluding Federalist paper, the last one, because I thought, I was trying to remember what was the last one, because Hamilton wrote the last one.
Would it bother you that I've never read that? I'm pretty sure.
Oh, it's fine.
But no, with a guy like me, political science and a law degree, it seems like I would have read that at some point in my.
At some point.
Yeah.
Yeah, some of it's boring.
But should I read it or not? Should the average American read it?
Yes, you should read 1:10:51 in the conclusion.
1:10:51, and that's every single American should read Federalist 1:10:51 in the conclusion. Every American.
Well, I think every American should read one.
Okay.
That's.
But that's number one, not
yeah. Federalist one.
Yeah.
And maybe, and then the other. Yeah. At the very least, you need to know what the purpose of the American government is.
Okay. So maybe I've read it.
Yeah.
Maybe. What percentage of Americans have read what the purpose of the federal government? Is it like 0.01, 0.001?
Probably very small.
Yeah. And that's okay because we're still succeeding as a country.
Well,
so we have a shared mission?
I think it's a problem that, well, how can you decide if we're succeeding if you don't know what we're supposed to be doing?
Okay.
And this brings me back to the answer to your question. So when I was reading it, the conclusion, one of the things that Hamilton emphasized is that this is a government that promises to never solve any problem. None of our problems will ever be solved. That's the whole point of pluralism, is that this is a constant balancing between these many rights, and that's something that will never go away because of the complexity of the human experience. And I know I've quoted this to you before, but out of the crooked timber of humanity, nothing straight has ever been wrought. that you can't make human beings perfect, and because you can't make human beings, all of our problems are eternal, and all we can promise is that what we're going to do is peacefully negotiate between these many issues, and keep working on all of them so that they're all supposed to be getting better, not worse, although that is not always the case. But if you are a good American, your government should never talk about solving problems. Your government, a good American government, will never solve a problem. We're just going to make it a little bit better, and then we're going to come back and look at it, and we're going to keep doing that.
So is it possible that 100%, or maybe 99.9, maybe 1 out of 1,000 people, would, if they listen to this podcast, would go, what the hell is that Professor and John talking about? This isn't on the news. This isn't on major blogs or the Atlantic article or some New York Times isn't doing this, and no one is talking about these issues.
There are some people.
Name one.
Yeah, David French.
Okay, David French.
Jonah Goldberg.
Two. We're both fans of them, but and
Kevin Williams.
I don't know Kevin.
Charles C.W. Cook.
Okay, I do listen to him sometime or read some of his stuff.
Sarah Isger.
Yeah. But you're talking about that one little niche of.
Yeah. How about Tony Williams from the Bill of Rights Institute?
Okay, yeah, I do know.
Yeah. Anybody at the Ashbrook Center. And
where you got your master's and PhD, or just master's?
I know I didn't go to school there.
You teach there?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I would say if you were to go back 20 years, this is something that Claremont used to do.
Yeah.
But have maybe abandoned that. But it used to be kind of the mission to keep teaching this to the next generation, because it's the thing that you have to keep teaching people. Because as we're talking about, the seduction of totalitarianism is that totalitarianism promises to solve problems, and people like that.
They do like that. A lot of people like that.
Solving
that
problems.
Way they can go back to their own
winning, right?
Yeah, they can go back to their own little world.
Yeah, and because it gives you it gives you a comforting story that you can tell yourself, whereas having this uncomfortable oh, you mean we don't get to just say this problem is solved and walk away from it? And I mean, we keep acting like civil rights is going to be solved one day.
Right.
Like civil rights is not going to be solved one day. It's the story of civil rights in the United States is the story of the United States. This entire everything, every part of American history is about the balancing of rights, the balancing of desires of the group, the individual, the court system, this group of settlers wants to leave and move into the territory. They have their desires. Where does that interact with the law? Where does that interact with the legislature? What about the people who already live there? There's not a single issue in American history that doesn't come down to the balancing of rights of Americans. It's all civil rights.
So I used to manage campaigns a long time ago. Now I haven't managed campaigns professionally for 30 years, but this sounds to me like a hard sale.
It is. And you'll never win a campaign on this. I mean, my limited running of campaigns, my slogan was, if it takes more than a bumper sticker,
right,
you've lost.
Right.
If it takes you more than 3 words to explain your position, you've lost, and 2 words is better.
Well, so what are we, who's that guy that used to tilt at windmills? I learned about that, I think.
Don Quixote.
Yeah, are we like 2 Don Quixote people in the wilderness out here? What are we doing?
We shouldn't be. But again, we get into this problem of, if we don't have people caring enough about the perpetuation of democratic institutions, then those institutions will begin responding to their own incentives.
But they all are doing that, right? Aren't newspapers and higher education and think tanks? I mean, isn't it all this enormous pressure now? Eyeballs on the screen,
yeah,
and advertising dollars and investors and companies. I mean, it's all going to that bumper sticker.
Yes, yeah, and because in a way, the incentives of technology and advertising is it's different than the incentives for living a good life. The incentives to live a good life is for me to come here in person and say, John Brackney, for us
I'm coming to Colorado.
Right, I'm coming to Colorado, right? But the incentives of technology would be for us to just like, share, or disagree with one another on a comment on a blog or a Facebook post or a comment somewhere.
And the more incendiary or naughty or whatever to get eyeballs on it.
Because actual friendships take time, and actual friendships take work, and disagreements and sharings and laughs and tears and all that. But those are also the things that make life worth living.
Right.
So where the incentives are in our lives, pointing, and this gets us back to the Bloodworth article. So many of the incentives in modern life are there to make us unhappy, and would lead us to be unhappy. And so what we're seeing is an epidemic of unhappiness. We are becoming less happy with each passing year.
Let me find out who's coughing on the screen here. Is that you, Tony, or is that someone else?
It could be me.
Well, Ben, if that was your voice, it's nice to hear your voice. Get ready for it here.
Tony's taking off, though.
Have a good one, Tony.
Indeed.
Okay.
But that's what Bloodworth was getting at, is that all these things make it easier and easier to live alone in your little, and that you'll be unhappy. There's no way to live a fake life and have your brain think that it's real. Some part of us knows
God or Mother Nature or some combination has determined us to be a social being with needing the real touch and smell. And
think about the difference between your mother who passed away, like what it meant for you to hug your mom in person. What in the virtual world could simulate that? What could ever replace how that felt to you in a way that's meaningful? And you say there's nothing.
I did read that. I'm making this number up, but there was an article about 6 months ago that 50% of single people would rather date a robot. So I don't know.
Yeah, well, that would tell me that their desires are not aligned with what produces long-term happiness.
All right. Well, Professor, as a ongoing theme, I read Professor Bloodworth's, as I said, twice, and I need to read it a third time because, as I said, it was actually really a bummer. And for anybody that listens to this show, we'll somehow get you that link or just bounce us a contact to see that. It really was not depressing to me, but sad.
Mm-hmm.
But there was an underlying theme of hope, not hope, because that's wrong, at least from my opinion. But to me, it isn't a sad article. It's a reflective, insightful article on how we should do things better.
Well, I don't know if you remember when we interviewed Blood Money.
Blood Money.
Blood Money
That's,
is
yeah,
his nickname.
Is it really his nickname?
So
Oh,
Professor Bloodworth's nickname is
I
Blood
love
Money.
that.
But Professor Bloodworth,
Uh-huh.
when we interviewed him, you asked him to end on a
Uh-huh.
positive note, and I don't know if you remember what he said. As you know, this all sounds depressing. End on a positive note, and he said, "Never bet against America."
Yeah.
And I still think, from it's one of the reasons I like to ride around is, I ride through your neighborhood and I encounter people in diners and and what you see when you travel around America is you see nice people
All over the place.
living all over the United States.
Yeah.
And you just say, there's some part of how we're receiving information that is not communicating that, and this is happening in our politics, and it's happening in our media, and it's happening in our educational institutions. They are so out of whack with what people want and how people are living that I can't help but go back to Jeff Bloodworth's. There's still a part of me that says don't bet against America.
Yeah.
Because at some point the American people will insist that these institutions conform to what we want them to be.
Because we like Little League and Boy Scouts and church and I mean all sorts of stuff that has now had scandals and problems and issues, and maybe they've become misguided or thwarted in their mission. But the bottom line is it's not just a feeling of
common decency in the workplace. I mean, how many times you'll see somebody say, "Oh, this person's amazing. We've got to hire them. We've got to promote them. We've got to give this person more, authority." And they're free institutions and where they're still allowed, true merit-based institutions. There are so many people out there willing to be mentors.
There are when asked for help, and even when they just see an opportunity to help somebody, not even asked.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, everybody I know who's a community leader, they all say the same thing, which is, if I could only get better people,
right?
I would love to have somebody in here who would learn how to do this job, and talk to a newspaper editor or a assistant district attorney or a judge or a school administrator, or some of my best friend who has a tech company. He always says, "I'm always hiring badasses." Like if you're a badass, you're hired.
You're hired.
And I'll find a way to make money with you. So those kinds of things still give me hope, as well as meeting people in person always does. What makes you depressed is when you're cut off. But the bad part is that in so many ways our way of life is doing everything possible to keep us separated, and keep us
that's
angry.
not a number 6 though, in technology, or
I think just the preservation. I think it still goes back to number 1 of the preservation of of an American culture that values its freedoms. And I keep using the word free, and I hear my sort of like progressive, lefty, liberal type friends. They get turned off by the term freedom, and so sometimes I'll use the word peace instead.
Yeah.
Because somehow or other, people have become convinced that peace and freedom are the opposite of one another, when they are necessary for both. It's a weird thing, but I really wish people would use peace and freedom interchangeably.
Yeah, I think it's a really nice train of thought that you have in that. I've started to adopt that too. It really is worthy.
Yeah.
People want peace. Most people, we pretend to hate each other, and we actually have emotional things. It seems like we hate somebody because some position or
Well, when you think about
philosophy,
when we advocate for peace, what are we saying? We're saying, like, I want you to be able to live peacefully. I want me to be living peacefully.
and we
which
agree
is,
when we want to cooperate,
right.
whether it's goods or ideas.
And another word we would call that is free. I want you to be free to live a life of your own choosing. I want me to be free.
And we can cooperate when
Right.
we both choose to voluntary. Yeah.
But somehow even these terms peace and freedom have become politicized, so that one sounds better to one group and one sounds better to the other, when really they're the same thing.
So I've asked you about the top 5 issues facing Americans today, with a little bit of worldwide, and then the top 5 issues of historically. And we got sidetracked a little bit. We only added 1 or 2, but really you trumped it by saying they're actually all the same. They're the same battles going on, and in fact, we want that, because that's unless we want some version of authoritarianism, that's what we're fighting for, is the ability to fight peacefully.
And
is that right? Am I
in
layman's terms? Am I listening to you?
Yeah. And but the reason is that we're all human beings, and in all of recorded history, human beings are genetically the same. there's no difference between you and Jesus or Mussolini or Stalin or Hitler, right? Like the human parts of us have not changed in recorded history. So the things that we're always going to fall prey to are probably always going to be the same. That's why it's valuable to learn history. That's why it's valuable to study the classics, or study classics.
So it's not just 3 branches and 3 levels and checks and balances. That's the way to practically describe the system. You're saying it's a deeper.
Yeah, all of that is in service to this idea of pluralism.
Yeah.
All of that stuff is there to protect this idea. I mean, that's why I said, if you're going to read Federalist 1. We're here to decide the question for all of human history, which is, can human beings live from reflection and choice? I mean, think about what that means, right? To be able to not, and the problem with the government that was very democratic under the Articles of Confederation was that it was a government designed to turn desires into action. And what we have now is a political culture where we somehow believe that what our government is supposed to do is turn our desires into action. Well, that was the problem. That was why we needed a constitutional convention,
right?
Was to get rid of our government that turned desires into action, in order to force us to be a people that will govern out of reflection and choice. Reflection means, think about, like, it's well chosen, that phrase by Hamilton, because reflection means you're forced to think about this for a certain period of time, right? Your emotions, they come, you have your feelings, and you don't get to act when you're having your feelings. You're forced to act after your feelings have passed, and you're being forced to think.
And then, practically speaking, the People's House, Congress, 435 people currently, that do have the ability to act on a whim. They see some problem in society and they can pass a bill in a day or 2.
Yep.
And then all of a sudden it comes to this grinding halt.
Right.
In a 6-year term Senate that used to be elected by states, now popular vote, and then there's still a president, and then there's still courts.
Right.
They can go back to the Constitution, this huge complex mechanism to slow everything down.
Right. Everything in our system is designed to stop you from getting what you want, because what you want is probably a bad idea.
And so other governments don't quite have what we have. They may have constitutions,
right,
but they're not constitutions that can be changed by a very complex. I mean, Russia had a constitution, right? China has a constitution.
Well, there's an old movie, I'm sure, called Club Paradise, with Robin Williams and Twiggy and Peter O'Toole, where he says, they have a constitution, and he says, yeah, but I think it's written in pencil.
Yeah.
You know, feel like
But even England has a constitution, right? But it's not a written constitution, or
well, it's written in the sense that it's the body of all their laws.
right. But that's a civil. That's a
yeah. It's an ongoing
flexible
body of law.
Right.
Right.
But that's not the same as our constitution.
Right.
So are we still unique, or are there some other countries that have adopted almost our standard?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know. There aren't very many that have a kind of federal system like we have.
Right, where states have enormous power and individuals have enormous power as long as it's not in law, written in law.
It was one of the things that I sort of always found frustrating when, you know, politicians were talking about nation building, which I was always kind of skeptical about anyway. But you know, anytime if we would try to impose our system, right, all of the, you know, globalist whatever guys, and they would always want to put a parliament in place, and I would always think to myself, hey, what's wrong with our system? You know, like I think it says something about our elite classes that when they would you know, want to impose a system on somebody else,
right,
that they wouldn't impose ours.
I know, you're on, yeah.
You know, because none of them like our system, because, well,
fascinating.
Well, my theory is that intellectuals always wish that they were, you know,
the
in
benevolent
power.
dictator.
Yeah, they all
Plato
want to be
again.
dictators, right?
Yeah.
Right.
As long as it's their dictator.
Yeah. And so they all love parliaments because parliaments can move faster and be more organic and are less tied to the past and stuff like that.
So let me add one more trend, and Ben, if you're still with us, I'd like to see if you have a question. Otherwise, we got to let the professor head on down to Durango. He's got an 8-hour drive through the Colorado Rockies still in springtime. I think it's a nice couple days though for him. So it's a nice drive as long as we get him on his way. We got to get you to that down in Durango off that last pass before dark. It seems like Democrats in particular, liberal Democrats especially, but also conservatives. Now I'm going to the Professor Bloodworth's commentary. There's this power structure that may not be different than historically. Haven't rich people in whatever stripe always run the world? I mean, that's still true today, isn't it? I mean, if you look at all the funding of think tanks or the political parties or candidates or who owns companies and runs companies, aren't we kind of just you? I know you are prestigious now, but you always haven't been prestigious. The common man, you're a common man.
I don't think I'm prestigious. I think I'm pretty common.
But the common man, we don't really control things, do we? I know we vote, but do we really control things, or are we just pawns? A lot of my friends, and I think Professor Bloodworth hinted at this, feel like they're just not a citizen is actually empowering, but just a cog in this wheel of people churning out stuff.
Well, I think it gets into the answer to your question gets into going back to question number one. How do you define what gives your own life meaning? And if you think that that government can give your life meaning, that's kind of a dead end.
Right. Well, I would agree with that, but isn't government, I'm making the point of somebody who could make it better than me, isn't the point of government to keep, in effect, in practice, to keep powerful interests still powerful? Even though it has checks and balances, it's this power structure or that. Where is the common man in this power structure? Not looking for something from the government, but just the ability to have freedom. I guess maybe you'd say that, well, look at all the world's richest people. They used to be common men too, and then boom, they're the world's richest men.
Well, if you're asking me if like rich people have an outsized influence on politics and law, then yes. The answer is yes. I mean, I can tell you that I have personal experience over the past 3 years where I'm constantly reminded that law for rich versus poor is very different in the United States. But at the same time, there's an implication in the second part of your question, though, that somehow there are people out there who believe that government can give their lives meaning. And it's it's not true. It is a necessary but not sufficient condition. In other words, being free or living at peace is what will allow you to go out and do the things that give your life meaning. But it can't tell you what those things are, right? That stuff is still up to you. And if you're looking for meaning in life from money or politics, you're not going to find it.
Well, let me, and I love this conversation because it's really deep on a variety of levels. But I'm trying to make a plea for the common man going, oh, that's nice, a professor, and John, a former politician, lawyer kind of guy, talking big thoughts about society. I'm trying to make a leap of that intoxication on the left of saying, if we were just to tax rich people under the tax structure that Reagan had, then we'd be able to have more college affordability or smoother roads or help people be able to afford groceries better or their heat bill. And it seems like that's on the left and the right, or the Republican. It seems like everybody's saying
but that's just simply a matter of mathematically being not true. I mean, to me, that's not even a political issue as much as it is just, you can look at the numbers and say that's not true.
Well, how about fundamental fairness issue though? Because that's where the Elizabeth Warrens of the world and other folks get a lot of credibility. They go, yeah, that is crazy to have. Warren Buffett says it, that everybody should pay. My secretary should pay. I should not be able to pay less taxes than my secretary. And boy, that resonates.
Yeah, I don't know that it's true that he pays less in taxes than his secretary.
But he did say that statement there, right? Isn't that you've heard that quote, right?
Yeah. Well, I think it was because he was talking about the tax rate on capital gains versus income.
Yeah,
that's not. So I mean, it's an apples and oranges comparison. Yeah.
Well, but the intoxication, I'm still trying to I'm trying to make sure this conversation of ours resonates with somebody who doesn't want to talk about words they haven't heard before. Mm-hmm. Well, if they're part of it resonates with me deeply, the ability to live your own life the way you want to live it, and the freedom and the ability to voluntarily contract by a handshake or writing to buy stuff or to marry or to live in the community you want to live, all the things that make people ruggedly independent and happy. Mm-hmm. But it still seems like the system is kind of a mess, or it seems like it seems like it does need something.
Well, that's
else.
why I would say, that was, I guess, point 5
that
I was trying to make, is that we have these institutions that are rigged, and there is the critics of that system are correct. I just don't think they have identified the sources of.
Well, do you have some ideas then on how to temporarily make things incrementally a little better? Do you have some ideas that we haven't talked about? We've gone through abortion and capital punishment and guns, and I mean every current issue over the last couple of years we've been having these conversations. And I guess my bigger, broader question is, what are we missing? The umbrella conversation of today's topic is, what are we missing as humans that we should be talking a lot more? And I've tried to get to that just by asking my 5 questions and then historically. But what are we missing that we should all be talking about? You and I and everybody else.
Real diversity.
Real diversity. Talk about it.
Well, I'd say the biggest way that institutions have become rigged to favor the perpetuation of wealthy people is that we have somehow become convinced that visual diversity is the goal rather than actual diversity. In other words, we'll look at a corporate board, and as long as the picture of that board looks diverse, that somehow
we've checked the box,
and then
we can go on making money and doing what we want to do.
When I would just simply say, when I look at the Supreme Court and all the clerks, they all come from the same law schools. They all come from the same private schools. We're patting ourselves on the back as if we have some kind of diversity, but what I see is just more of a perpetuation of the wealthy and elite.
Well, that gets to my that gets to my point that the wealthy control the world. And
if you look at, like, every time we get rid of a standard in higher education, for instance, we pat ourselves on the back and say, "Oh, this is going to be the thing that finally fixes this." Every time we get rid of a standardized test, and what we don't realize is that every time we make one of these things more complex, what we're actually doing is making it easier for rich people to game the system.
For the people that can understand and hire for complexity.
Yeah, and the same can be true for starting a business, right? What you say, no, we're gonna create new regulations to promote this kind of business, but what happens is you've just made it harder for that next business to start up, because it means that you have to hire an attorney,
right?
And
versus filling out the forms yourself.
And I don't think if you're a rich person, you look at that and say, well, who doesn't have $250,000 to
you shouldn't
account
be in
for,
business
right,
if you can't do it right.
But when you're starting a business, you're starting a business with nothing. not $250,000 that you know how to spend because you
you're going to put it in your home, and if you lose your business, you lose your home too.
And you haven't spent your entire life swimming in elite institutions where you're getting free legal advice from your dad's country club buddy
because you're golfing.
Because they're golfing buddies or something like that. Like, these are all things that rich people don't think about, but they also benefit from and would never see as a problem, and because they don't have to actually challenge themselves as long as the picture looks diverse.
So how would you describe that in layman's terms? I would have formally, maybe 20 years ago, described that as a form of populism. But then in the last 10 years, I wouldn't describe it that at all. But it does weave together with Professor Bloodworth's commentary. Mm-hmm. What would you describe that angst about, or that frustration? I mean, to describe it as number 5, you going right back to that again?
Well, I would just say that one of the things that is an underappreciated distinction is the distinction between Wilson and Theodore Roosevelt, where, if you want to describe the essential difference between these two guys, is that one of them wanted to Wilson wanted to engage in permanent regulation in order to create equality of condition. And Theodore Roosevelt said, no, we want to focus on equality of opportunity, because that's the thing that will always get rigged. And what we need to focus on is punishing bad people who do bad things, and we don't need to invent new laws. We just need to prosecute the old laws under the old standards.
And that goes all the way back to Roosevelt. That major distinction.
It goes back to Hamilton versus Jefferson.
Same thing, the human condition.
Yeah, Hamiltonianism, if it means anything, it means that we want to create a society that is a self-selecting meritocracy, which I was explain. We break that down a little bit, but like, self-selecting means who chooses who's going to what kind of life. I choose, right? Uh-huh. Self-selecting. I choose myself, and then I am choosing what I value. I'm choosing what I will work for, but we want earned success for anyone who chooses to be good at their own life.
Their own choosing.
At their own life. And that's the thing that has to be preserved. That's the thing that has to be cherished, because.
Well, most people would agree with that, left or right, or liberal or conservative. Isn't that a fairly?
I don't know.
Doesn't that resonate with most people, or is it just me because I value that?
I don't know, because that's certainly not the way people put it. Because now what people would say is, we want to achieve equality of condition. We want to.
Well, there is some of that. We want
to measure and make people the same, and then we're going to change the institutions of government and life and corporate life in order to make people the same.
But they don't actually mean that, do they? I mean, I kind of understand that everybody should have some basic level of healthcare, or basic level of housing, or basic level of food security. It to me seems like a desirable thing. But
But there's a difference between having something available for someone who needs it and wants it and desires it, versus having it being thrust upon you. and saying you must engage in this behavior. That's the distinction. That's the difference between compulsion and peace and freedom.
Yeah.
Right. Is
Well, but you're saying, but everybody the food and housing and maybe basic education. It's not being compulsed upon anybody. Isn't that I'm trying to echo my inner Elizabeth Warren, or AOC, or.
Well, no, I would say not necessarily.
Really?
I mean,
food and shelter?
Yes, I would assume that most people want those things, but we talked about negative and positive liberties
Right.
on a previous show, but that's the definition of a negative liberty. You must be free to be left alone, versus when do you choose to engage in your civic life with others. That's the important distinction between a negative and a positive liberty. And you can't say, if you think about the original Second Amendment was taken from a lot of different state statutes, but it was as much to protect people from not being forced into the military if they didn't want to be. So it was, you have the right to keep and bear arms, but we're not going to force you to keep and bear arms if you do not want them.
Yeah, interesting.
You can say, well, why wouldn't you? Well, I don't know. Those aren't my religious beliefs. I eat meat, you eat meat, but I have friends who are vegetarians, and you would say, who could possibly
not enjoy bacon?
Yeah, or sausage, right? And but they don't want to, so we shouldn't force them. And if we were to use the power of the government to force them to eat bacon, then we would say, now we understand that this is violence, this is compulsion. In a way, you don't notice it when we're talking about healthcare, but you would notice it if you were a vegetarian being forced to eat meat.
Right. Fascinating. All right, that's worthy of talking more about. Professor, forgive me for, maybe it's just because you're in person, but we've gone a full hour without even seeing. I know, and you got to get on the road.
Yeah.
So, Ted, are you still, not Ted, Ben, are you still with us? The light's on my screen, so we're in our backyard and the sun's on it. You still with us?
I'm still with you, yes.
You might not.
You may have gone up, but I can't even see. I can't
even
see the screen.
Nope, I'm here.
Halfway through.
Oh, good. Oh, and Bart tried to join a long time ago, but I never saw it.
Oh, no.
I know. So, Bart, you would have added a lot to it. Ben, I'm giving you one opportunity to bite at the apple from this conversation.
Wow.
Observations, conclusions, ideas, concerns.
Well, you're talking about the concept of 5 issues facing America, which is a great conversation just in itself. One of the things that I've picked out of this, well, several things, but facing America right now is the concept of worldliness, as Professor has said, versus isolationism, which some people said, let's just have our own little world right here. We're happy. We shouldn't care about the rest of the world. So I think that's one of the things facing us. Let's see, I just wrote a bunch of notes here. Another thing I mentioned is, you mentioned this too in the conversation, do we as simple human beings, and I consider myself a simple human being, do we really control anything? We elect people that supposedly represent our interests, but do they really? And if we've elected them, can I unelect them the next time around? Chances are probably not, because I'm a single, simple human being. So we've gone through a whole lot here, and it's been a fantastic conversation. I've enjoyed every word of it.
Thank you. Professor, do you have a reaction to either of those 2 prongs that he has picked up on?
Just to agree with him, figuring out what America's role in the world is one of those things that's kind of an ongoing endeavor. And then,
well, it's trying to keep it simple.
it can be, but I think one of the big lessons in a global world is that understanding that when other countries are safe and prosperous and free, that's good for us, because that means we have nothing to fear from them. And that it is part of our national security for other countries to be safe and prosperous and free. And then the second point he made is a good, it's another, good plug for focusing on the important things in life and expecting a lot less out of politics. And because, democracy will break your heart 49 out of 100 times, and it gets really depressing when it's 48 times straight.
I still think that
but I'll just say,
yeah.
One of my close friends is always trying to push this idea on me that that we're a lot less in control than we think we are. And so
well, that's a depressing way to end the conversation.
Well, it's true. A lot of our life is just luck, but maybe just go through life with a little more humility, because we realize just how lucky we are.
So that goes back to Professor Bloodworth's comment. That was kind of a main thrust of his comment.
We should have him back on the show.
Yeah, we should. And Ben, you've had a chance to read that column yet, or that opinion piece from Professor Bloodworth, or are you going to?
I'm going to. And I'll be honest, I have not read the Federalist Papers, and I probably should if I'm going to participate in this kind of discussion. So yes, I'm going to read 110 and 51. Absolutely.
Okay, well, you and I have a homework assignment there. That's a good one, good for us to do, and we have the ability to do that. Okay, Professor, I know you got to get on the road, so it's not a great way to finish, but when you drive across almost the entire Rocky Mountains, from the plains of Denver to the Durango, that is the whole width of the Rocky Mountains in one day, and what a beautiful sunny day for you to do so.
Yeah, I just feel bad I might not have time to stop to take too many pictures.
No, I know, and that's why I'm going to let you go right now, because it really is maybe it's only a 6.5 hour drive, so you maybe have a little bit of time to stop. Bart, if you were able to join in, sorry to not see you because we're in a full sun. Ben, thanks for being with us. Professor, you're always welcome in Colorado.
Hey, good to be here. Love it.
All right. Thank you all.